Hey everyone, welcome to the video. This one we're going over the Thursday Night Football Showdown Slate, the Texans versus the Colts. Anyway, before we continue, if you guys could leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out, really appreciate it. Getting close to 3K subs, so hopefully we can hit that soon. Really appreciate all the support on here. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm also at ChrisPinella16. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I say we get right into the video. It should be a somewhat pretty interesting game. We got some fun fantasy options. Deshaun Watson, DeAndre Hopkins, Jacoby Brissett's not too bad. T.Y. Hilton, his status is up in the air. Bo Fuller's status is up in the air. So we'll break it all down. But anyway, let's start off with, at the top, Deshaun Watson at 11,600. Now, I really can't envision a way that I make any lineups without him for this slate. I mean, I don't usually like fading quarterbacks on showdown slates. I mean, I'm not saying you have to absolutely captain the guy, but I do think he's definitely, you pretty much have to get him to the flex spot at the very least, I think. The last game was ugly though versus Baltimore as they got blown out 41-7. And Watson did not find the end zone for the first time since I can remember. I believe all season he's had at least one touchdown, either if it was rushing or passing. I think week 5 he didn't have a passing touchdown, or week 4 versus Carolina, but still had a rushing touchdown. Other than that though, he's had a touchdown at least every single week. And yeah, versus Jacksonville didn't have a passing touchdown, but did get one on the ground. But he's been great this year, most of the time. He's still a top MVP candidate, even though recency bias really isn't working in his favor because that terrible outing versus Baltimore. But that Baltimore defense has been playing really well recently. They've stepped it up since earlier in the season when people were kind of calling that defense dust. They've really stepped it up and have looked good recently. But he does get a softer matchup here at home versus Indianapolis, which isn't saying much because Indy's defense has been pretty solid just from a number standpoint, but they're not the best defense in the world. It's not something I'm actively like, oh my gosh, I got to play Indianapolis' defense. It's not too bad of a matchup. But they've only been allowing 15 points per game to quarterbacks, which is pretty solid, and they are 10th DVOA versus the pass. But still, Deshaun Watson is dangerous on the ground and through the air, and he's averaging 30 rushing yards per game, and he has 5 rushing touchdowns as well. So it's a nice floor to give you, and you also have a nice high ceiling with his rushing ability as well, if he can rack up some passing touchdowns and get it done on the goal line himself. So Deshaun Watson, I don't have to sit here and tell you guys you should probably just play Deshaun Watson, because you should, and I'm sure you guys know that as well. Do you have to captain him? I don't think you have to captain him. There's some other good options like the guy I'm about to talk about next, but he is expensive, but 11,600 is not that too bad for someone like Deshaun Watson. So I do like him, obviously. DeAndre Hopkins, obviously I like him as well. He comes in at 11K, the second most expensive guy on the slate. And he's just another guy that's extremely scary to fade. If I don't have DeAndre Hopkins or Deshaun Watson on a showdown slate, I am profusely sweating the entire time because it takes a couple plays for these guys to go bananas. I know it doesn't feel like he's been great this year, but he hasn't had less than 15 points since week 5, and he's only had 2 games this year in the single-digit point threshold. Not too bad. And we know he has big upside no matter who he's facing. Week 1 versus the Saints, where he was up with Marshawn Lattimore. He made him look like hot garbage week 1, and we saw how quickly Lattimore went back to shutting guys down afterwards. So that just speaks to DeAndre Hopkins' insane talent, arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL. And the Colts are pretty middle of the road when it comes to defending wide receivers, but that doesn't really concern me too much because it's tough. As a mediocre matchup as it is for the Colts, it's an even tougher matchup for the Colts to be able to defend DeAndre Hopkins. You can double team him. It doesn't matter. He can still get the job done here. And he still has his elite volume every single week. He has a 31% target share in the year, which is second only behind Michael Thomas. 36% market share of the team's air yards, and a 72% weighted opportunity share, only behind Michael Thomas. So yes, Hopkins is a fantastic play if you can afford him, but you may just want to make it a priority anyway, considering there isn't many consistent options on this slate. There's a lot of okay options, but there's really not many just rock solid consistent options besides someone like DeAndre Hopkins. So definitely like Hopkins, and I feel like you should try your best to get him in your lineup, at least at the flex spot. So yes, I obviously like DeAndre Hopkins. Jacoby Brissett, beef brisket, 10,400. So some of the quarterback pricings we've seen on showdowns this year, just based off of some of the pricings we've seen on showdowns this year, I was hoping he'd be a little bit cheaper when I first opened up the salaries, but they blew him all the way up to 10,600, which it kind of sucks. I mean, the past 3 games have not been great for him. I know the one he got hurt, but still, I should say the past 2 games then. So he had 10 points versus Denver and 16 points versus Jacksonville. Not absolutely destroying the world, but they priced him all the way up. But this is a good matchup versus Houston, and we just saw he dropped 31 points versus Houston. What was that, week 7? 39 pass attempts, 26 completions, 24 touchdowns, no picks, 5 rushing attempts, 6 yards. Pretty good day. I believe that was his best game of the season. Yes, it was. So versus Houston. So I like him. I just wish he wasn't priced all the way up here. And so here's the main thing is, if we need to know if T.Y. Hilton is playing or not. He's kind of the wild card here. If T.Y.'s in, obviously this is a boost to the entire offense, especially BRISSETT, because it's going to be throwing to the most. And obviously T.Y. Hilton's got a ton of talent. And it's a great matchup too versus Houston. They're 25th DVOA versus the pass, and are allowing 24 points per game to quarterbacks, which is the 3rd most on the slate. I should also mention they lost Marlon Mack, which is a huge blow to the offense, so I expect them to probably rely on moving the ball through the air. But the backup did look pretty good last week. When Williams, he had a pretty solid outing, I believe 13 carries, 105 yards, 116 yards, something like that. And I believe he got into the end zone as well. But either way, he had a pretty good game. And I think him and Wilkins are pretty much just going to split the workload back there. So they should be able to run the ball. They got a good offense. But obviously, no Marlon Mack hurts. Marlon Mack's obviously the more talented running back of the 3 or 4 they had back there. HINES, Williams, and Wilkins. But yeah, I think it's going to be much easier to move the ball through the air here, especially if you got T.Y. Hilton back. We don't know if he's going to be back yet, but if they do, I think BRISSETT should have a pretty solid game, and I do think he's a fine flex option. Probably not going to make the captain spot for me, but definitely a solid flex option if T.Y. Hilton's in. If he's not in, he's still in play just because of how bad Houston's been versus quarterbacks this year, but definitely kind of caps his upside a little bit. T.Y. Hilton, like I just said, wild card. We don't know if he's going to play. I have no idea. But he did miss Monday and Tuesday practice, but he was then estimated as a full participant for Wednesday's practice. It was just an estimate, so we'll see. But this guy kills Houston, though, so if he does play, I think he's a good play. It's not a secret. It's a very well-known thing that he crushes Houston. I don't know what it is, but he loves facing this defense. In 15 games versus them in his career, he has 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns, which he's averaging over 100 yards per game. And about 0.8 of a touchdown per game? I'm doing the math right off the top of my head there, but it's pretty darn good numbers. He crushes them. And if he does play, though, we can't be totally sure about his health, so there would be a risk depending on how much he plays if he does. But the coach said he does have a real shot to play, so that's kind of encouraging language to hear there. So if T.Y. Hilton's in, he's a fine play. I mean, I believe the Colts are going to be trailing in this game. They're going to throw the ball quite a bit. They lost Marlon Mack, so this is a very good defense to pass on. And T.Y. Hilton is the Texans' what do you want to call it? The destroyer, whatever. So Hilton would be a fine play, but we'll have to monitor the news. Marlon Mack is out, so it's a hit to the run offense for Indianapolis. Zach Pascal at 8K. He's fine. I do feel like he's a bit overpriced here, a little bit, but obviously it would be a big downgrade if T.Y. Hilton plays. But if he doesn't, he'll be the wide receiver 1 on this team in a good matchup, and he did kill in this matchup week 7, where he had 7 targets, 6 catches, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns, which was good for 31 fantasy points. So it was a pretty big day for Pascal, his best game of the year. And he's had consistent targets each week, but they really haven't amounted to much. I mean, 6, 7, 6 the past 3 weeks. Not too bad, but I mean, 3 points, 4 points, and 18 versus Pittsburgh because they got into the end zone. But I do feel like he's a little overpriced here, so I'm not saying you have to plug him in. Even if T.Y. Hilton's out, I don't think he's an absolute lock because of his price tag. If he was in the 6K range to lower 7K range, yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good play. But at 8K, I feel like you could get away with fading him. But if he is the wide receiver 1 with Hilton out, he should be able to get the job done. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets 12 to 15 points if Hilton is out. So Pascal is an option. Will Fuller, another wild card. So we got a lot of news to monitor here because Will Fuller will open up a lot for guys like Kenny Stills, and then if T.Y. Hilton's out, it opens up a lot for the secondary options for the Colts. But I don't know if he's going to play or not. He's logged some limited practice this week, but he is a game time decision, and playing him is still a dangerous game even if he's given a go because his hamstring could flare up and knock him out early, just like that. What week versus Indianapolis, actually week 7, got the hamstring injury quick and knocked him right out of the game, which sucked if you played him in DFS. But the upside here is amazing with Deshaun Watson. He's a touchdown machine with him, and they just have a great connection. He's the deep ball threat, big air yards guy, so obviously he can take the top off of defense. But I can't really discuss too much here without knowing his status. but you would definitely get the softer coverage between him and Hopkins if he ends up playing. So Will Fuller, he's a risky play, but he might be able to pay dividends if he's a full go, but we don't know, and there's always the re-injury risk, so tread carefully with Will Fuller. But I do like the guy. I really like him as a wide receiver. Carlos Hyde comes in at 7K. I think he's fine. The volume has been pretty good for him. 16 carries a game, which is 11th in the league right now, right behind Le'Veon Bell. Not really involved in the passing game whatsoever, though, but he's had some good games and some bad ones. Like I said, though, he's not a threat in the passing game, which does cap his upside. But they are home favorites here, and you guys know I love home favorite running backs. So it's a great correlation. It's not a great matchup, though, versus Indianapolis, as they are 7th in points given up to running backs. But they're 23rd versus the run as well, so maybe it's not as bad, but still, just in terms of fantasy points given up, which is what we care about the most, not been so great for opposing running backs. He's more than likely going to have to find the end zone to pay off a salary, but he certainly can if they get around the goal line. He's going to be the running back there. And I do like the volume he's been getting in certain games. 19, 19, 26, 21, 20 versus Jacksonville. So I like the potential volume here. I do think Carlos Hyde is a decent play. Not my favorite play in the world just because he doesn't catch passes, but he is in play. And now at this point, we have a messy situation for the Colts running back spot. Wilkins has been the primary backup for Marlon Mack, with HINES being the pass-catching running back. But he was out last week, and then Williams looked really good. He dominated for 116 yards and a touchdown. So I assume they're going to have to go with a committee here. They're not just going to tell Williams to hit the bench off that good performance. So it's kind of a gross situation. I don't know if I want to pay $6,600 for someone that's really not going to catch passes and split work. So I really can't see myself playing Jordan Wilkins, and it's a much better matchup through the air for the Colts. So I'm probably personally going to pass here. If you're building a whole bunch of lineups, you might want some exposure to a couple of these guys just in case they get into the end zone once or twice. But it is a messy situation, so I would just recommend going with your gut. If you want to avoid the situation, I really don't think it's going to kill you if you avoid the situation here. So that's probably what I'm going to end up doing because I really don't think there's a lot of upside here. Kenny Stills comes in at 6,400, and again, we have to wait on the news here for him. He had a role even with Fuller playing, but if he does play, obviously it's going to hurt Stills just in general. He's going to lose some targets and some snaps. But I mean, once Will Fuller left, with the injury, his snaps boosted into the 90% range, but you would have to expect that to come down a bit. He did have a really good game, though, versus Indianapolis week 7, where he caught 4 or 5 targets for 105 yards, which was good for 17 points. This was the game Will Fuller got hurt in, and that was his best game of the season. Still, you got to watch for the Fuller news if you want to play Stills, but he's not been great, though. 6 points, 9 points, 5 points, 17 points, so it's not like he's been exploding with Will Fuller out. So we'll have to see. I mean, he's been okay. The targets have been there, 5, 5, 4, 7, but really hasn't done too much with them, and he's yet to get into the end zone besides week 1, where they were all playing, where he had 3 catches on 3 targets for 37 yards and a touchdown. So there's not a lot of upside here, especially at 6,400. NYHEIM HINES at 6,200. I think he's a pretty interesting play. And he would make sense if you think the Colts are playing from behind here, which Vegas does think they are going to be playing from behind. He's got a firm grasp on the pass-catching change of pace role running back for this offense, so it would make some sense. He gets consistent targets, 4, 7, 3, 3, 2, 5, 6, 4, 2, 4. And if they're trailing, he's going to be involved in the passing game. And if they're struggling to run the ball without Marlon Mack, I could see him getting about 5 to 8 targets here, and PPR scoring, I think that's not too bad. Should be able to get into the double digits. Is he going to get into the end zone? I don't know. That's a little iffy there, but if they are trailing, I do think NYHEIM HINES would be a good play. So you just kind of have to run with the game script there. If you do think the Colts are trailing, good play. If you don't think they're trailing, probably not the best play in the world for NYHEIM HINES. Let's see who's next. Williams already talked about. Like I said, he had a really good game last week, but I do think he's going to split the load with Jordan Wilkins. I don't think they're just going to kick him to the curb. So we'll see. It's a messy situation, but he did look pretty good last week. But I don't know. I just really don't want to target a timeshare committee back there. Duke Johnson at 5K. He's kind of just like NYHEIM HINES here. I prefer him in a game where I think Houston is trailing, but I really don't think they're going to be much at all, if any, in this game. But he has been solid. I mean, 6, 19, 13, 7, 13, 7, 9, 4, 3, 13. Solid games, some clunker games, but he's been pretty solid. He did score 19 points versus Jacksonville, was nice. I believe he got into the end zone not last game, but versus Jacksonville and Oakland, he did find the end zone. Other than that, he did find one versus Kansas City. I think that's it on this season. So The PPR scoring is nice for a guy like Duke Johnson. Does see consistent targets. Last week he only saw 2, but 5 the 3 weeks before that, then 4, 1, 3, 1. So Texans aren't usually a team that typically involves the pass catching, throws the ball to running backs a lot, but they have been getting Duke Johnson a little bit involved here, and I do believe he should, get about double-digit touches here. So Duke Johnson, he's fine, but I just don't think they're really going to be trailing too much, so I can see this being more of a Carlos Hyde game, but we will see. I do think he's fine, though. Zach Ebron, he comes in at 4,600. He is questionable, so we will have to see if he plays. You got to monitor the injury news, and my thing is loading, so we will see. Here, let me refresh the page here, see if it works. Well, it's not working. So we will, if it pops up, it'll pop up. But just for Eric Ebron here, he's questionable. I'm going to guess he's playing. He was a popular play last week. I played him. My donkey played him, and he did really nothing at all. He got, 6 fantasy points, so it's loading. Now my email's loading. I don't know. Okay, there we go. All right, let me see if Eric Ebron pops back up. If it does, it does. Well, he's coming off 12 target. He was coming off a 12 target game where he saw 61% of the snaps, which was a nice increase from where he was just in the beginning of the season. He was seeing about 30 to 40% of the snaps. So it was nice to see his snaps increase up to 61%. But those went back down to 43% the week prior, last week, not the week before that. And he only had 4 targets last week, so nothing too great there. Houston has been a solid team versus tight ends this year, only allowing 11 points per game, and we will have to monitor the Hilton news. If Hilton does play, we're going to have to downgrade all the secondary options like Ebron on the Colts offense. If Hilton does miss, I think Eric Ebron should have at least, a decent enough workload in this game to be able to pay off salary, because he's not too expensive. What is he, only 4,400, so it's not, or 4,600, so not too bad. We know the guy's got touchdown upside. Usually as a case of the drops, though, so we will have to see. But I do think he has a chance of getting into the end zone. I do think the Colts are trailing, so I think they're going to be throwing the ball. But again, you have to monitor the T.Y. Hilton news. Jack Doyle at 4,400. Still not popping up. I don't know. The website broke on me. But Jack Doyle, he completely goosed last week. Not one target, which was very odd. Despite seeing 65% of the snaps, he outsnapped Ebron, but he did absolutely nothing. Didn't register one stat. I don't see that happening again, though. He had consistent targets every single week of the season beforehand, and he could get a cheap touchdown. But again, you got to monitor the Hilton news. If Hilton's out, obviously you're going to get a boost to all these secondary options. If he plays, got to downgrade all these guys. Marcus Johnson, I think he's somewhat interesting here at 4,200. So he had a decent game last week. He scored 13.8 fantasy points. He had 4 targets, and he caught a touchdown as well. And I believe he only had, 30 or 40 some yards. But he still had 13.8 fantasy points. Not too bad. In the past 2 weeks, he's seen about 80 and 93% of the snaps, so he's on the field. But again, I sound like a broken record here, but you got to monitor the Hilton news. If Hilton's out, it's a good matchup, and he's going to be on the field, so I think Marcus Johnson would be somewhat interesting. Texans defense, they're going to take a hit with no J.J. Watt, but they are home favorites. Not a core play for me or anything, because Brissett is not one to make a lot of mistakes. So there's not a lot of high upside here for the Texans defense, and they're not a good unit whatsoever anyway. And the Colts do have a good offensive line, so I really don't think there's a lot of upside here for the Texans defense. They are cheap enough, though, and they are at home, so you can take a stab at them, but not something I absolutely love. Kame Fairbairn, I think he's an excellent option here. He's one of the better fantasy kickers. I know last year he was the number 1 fantasy kicker, and he's just a good kicker. He's playing at home in a dome. Makes a lot of sense to like Fairbairn. Adam Vinatieri has been a mess this season. He's missing field goals. He's missing extra points. He looks terrible. So if I had to pick one, I'm going to go with Fairbairn, and I do think he's probably going to be one of the more popular options on this slate, just because everyone knows him as a good kicker. Texans have more scoring opportunities, and they're going to be able to move the ball better. So I do prefer Fairbairn there. If you want to get contrarian with the kicker, go with Vinatieri, but I would not recommend it. Darren Fells, he's pretty much touchdown or bust. He does not get a lot of targets. He does not get a lot of catches, but if he gets into the end zone, you'll be happy. He had that 2 touchdown game where he scored 20 fantasy points the 1 week, so everyone was kind of jumping on the bandwagon there. He is 3,400 though. Colts are slightly below average to tight ends. Last year they were terrible. They've gotten a little bit better, allowing 13.2 points per game to them. So if you want to take a shot with Darren Fells, hope for a cheap touchdown, I understand it, but I'm not in love with it, but he is cheap enough to where he makes some sense. Let's see if this actually worked. There we go. We finally got the website back to work. All right, so where were we? So Darren Fells, let's just pull up his game log really quick. Sorry that wasn't working. I don't know what was going on, but so like I said, touchdown or bust. 2 points, 7 points, 23 points versus Oakland where he caught 2 touchdowns. And actually last year he had a really good game versus Oakland on the Browns, so maybe he just likes picking on Oakland. I don't know. Got 4 points versus Indy, 12 versus Kansas City. Then, didn't he have 2 touchdowns versus Atlanta? He had 2 catches, 20 yards, 2 touchdowns, 16 fantasy points. Versus the Chargers, 15.9 fantasy points. So he's pretty much touchdown or bust guy. He's not going to be a huge yardage guy. He's had a couple of games of over 50 yards, but other than that, you can't really bank on it. But Darren Fells, he is interesting. He's playing, majority of the snaps here, around 60-70%, sometimes higher. So Darren Fells is fine at his price tag, but probably going to have to get into the end zone. Colts defense is cheap, and they've been okay. 10, 8, 7, 9 versus Houston last time, and Houston scored 23 points, but still I still got 9 fantasy points. Then 10, 3, 2, 5, 7. They've actually been pretty solid this year for fantasy. Past few weeks though have been against some pretty easy teams. Jacksonville, not the best offense in the world. They did get Nick Foles back though, but then they played Miami, Pittsburgh, Denver, not the most imposing offenses in the world, but they did do pretty well versus Kansas City and Houston, so I would give them props for that. So at 3,200, I do think they are in play. Might be a little bit more contrarian because people aren't going to want to pick on DeShaun Watson, which I don't blame them, but I do think the Colts defense would be somewhat in play there. Chester Rogers at 2,600. So he's not a full-time player. He's only seeing about 50% of the snaps right now, or the past 2 weeks, I should say. And the volume isn't great. 2 targets, 4, 5, 2. Not terrible, but not great. But he is only 2,600. And if Hilton isn't a go, he would be worth a flyer. If Hilton plays, probably not going to be on my radar. Let's see. Who is next? Paris Campbell is out. I don't know if you guys saw a picture of his hand on social media. It's disgusting. It's like a balloon. KEKE. Kind of glossed over him, I guess. 2,400. So, like Fuller, this guy loves getting hurt. But he did come back last week, logged 72% of the snaps, but he only had 3 catches on 3 targets for 25 yards. If Fuller is back, you're going to have to downgrade him as well. He had a monster game last year versus them in the playoffs, though. I did play KEKE in a showdown slate last year in the playoffs, and I want to say he had I don't remember. I feel like he had almost 16, 16 targets? Or he had a ton of catches, had a really good game. I don't know if he got into the end zone, but the guy did awesome. This isn't relevant to this year, but just top of my head, I remembered that. But yeah, he's not playing a lot of the. If Will Fuller's back, he's gonna get a hit. If Will Fuller's out, KEKE might be worth a flyer at 2,400. Wouldn't be the worst play in the world. He's seeing consistent targets when he's on the field. 3 targets, 5, 6, 4, 3, nothing versus the Chargers. Then 4 targets versus Jacksonville. So I wouldn't say he's the worst play in the world, and he is pretty cheap, and I do like the guy. So 2,400 is not the worst punt play. Then the last guy I'm probably going to talk about here is AKINS here, Jordan AKINS at 1,600. He's the worst version of Darren Fells, and Darren Fells isn't even that exciting in the first place. So, you pretty much need a touchdown here. He's not going to do anything in the yardage department, but 2 points last week, 5, 3, 3, 6, 3, 5. Did have a 2 touchdown game versus the Chargers, though, where he had 5 targets, 3 catches, 73 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So he's capable of it, but you pretty much need a touchdown. But he has not goosed you, so at least at 1,600, you're pretty much guaranteed to at least get a couple points here, which isn't too bad. He's going to let you fit in some studs. And he is playing he's played over 50% of the snaps pretty much every single week this year. We've seen him all the way up in the 70s, so he would be on my radar as a punt play, and he does open up some salary. So Jordan AKINS, not the worst play in the world. Just cross your fingers and hope he gets a touchdown, and just hope it's not Darren Fells catching the touchdowns. But anyway, guys, that's going to be it for all the breakdown of the players. Just to build a lineup, I have not tried to yet, so we will see what fits. Again, don't go plugging this lineup into any of your contests. I'm making this up on the fly. But at captain, let's see. Well, we could try. I'm probably looking at Deshaun Watson or DeAndre Hopkins here. I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to fit. If we go with DeAndre Hopkins, save a little bit of salary from Deshaun Watson. First thing he's going to do is plug in Deshaun Watson. I probably won't play JACOBY BRISSETT. We got 3,800 left. I'm going to look at probably Fairbairn at this point. And let's see what else we can do. So we have 3,800 left. I want to fit in someone like, oh, I don't know. What's Carlos Hyde get us? 700 left? That's not going to be possible because the lowest I really want to go is Jordan Akins. Maybe we could fit in. So if I, maybe NYHEIM HINES, 1,500 left. We just miss out on Jordan Akins. So what? You live in that 6K ranges. Oh, man. Maybe I don't know, maybe the Texans defense, maybe, I don't know, you got 3,700 left, you could go with Adam Vinatieri, Darren Fells, just playing around with it. I said I don't love the Texans defense, though. Maybe if you go with COUTEE, if Will Fuller's out, you got 5,300 left. You could go with Duke Johnson, that might make some sense. Not in love with it, though, but he is a decent correlation with Deshaun Watson. But again, you just got to play around with it. But I'm looking at probably Hopkins or Deshaun Watson at my captain spot. You could always go crazy and use Fairbairn there. So if we actually just play around with that, let's plug in Fairbairn at the captain spot and see what we can fit. It's probably going to be pretty fun, actually. So Deshaun Watson, DeAndre Hopkins, JACOBY BRISSETT. We're going to lock those guys in. So now we have 5,650 left, and that's actually not too bad. We could probably fit in someone like Carlos Hyde. You got 4,300 left. That gets you Marcus Johnson. If T.Y. Hilton happens to be out, that wouldn't be too bad. Texans defense is there. Darren Fells is there. Colts defense is there. You could also, if T.Y. Hilton plays, I wonder if this is possible. Yeah, 1,700 left. That wouldn't be too bad because then you could still fit in Jordan Akins if T.Y. Hilton plays. So you got the Fairbairn at the captain, and we've seen him have big games this season. We couldn't get Draftkings to work when we were talking about him, but 1 point last week versus Baltimore. That sucked, but they got blown out. But then 11, 10, 12, 6, 13, 4, 3, 7, 4. Hasn't been excellent, but we know the guy's got upside. He's got a good leg, and I do expect him to score points here. So, yeah, don't mind it there. And then you still got Deshaun Watson, DeAndre Hopkins, JACOBY BRISSETT, T.Y. Hilton, taking a shot at Jordan Akins, hoping for a random touchdown into the goal line. Not the worst play in the world. So we're just playing around with it, but it's just maybe a couple ways you could go with roster construction. But anyway, guys, I will leave you with that. Remember to leave a like. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really appreciate it. You also follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16. I've been thinking about getting a green screen behind me so I don't have to have this box here because it looks annoying just whenever I look at it. So it'd be nice to just get a green screen and have my just like the outline of my body, face, whatever on the screen instead of a box here because I really don't like the box on the screen, but we'll see. I don't even know how much they are, but I'll look them up on Amazon and have to see if I can get one. All right, guys, I'll leave you with that. I wish you guys the best of luck and enjoy the game. If you're playing NBA tonight, enjoy NBA. Hope you guys do well. Yeah, see you guys in the next video.